September 1953. A father walks into a standard showroom in Coventry, his week's wages folded carefully in his jacket pocket. His children are waiting outside, noses pressed against the glass, staring at something they've only dreamed about. For 8 years, this family has lived on rations. For 8 years, every journey has meant waiting for the bus in the rain. But today, everything changes. Britain is finally breathing again. The grey pallor of austerity is lifting sweets. Had just come off the ration list after 14 long years, and families are daring to dream again. The wireless is full of news about the young Queen's coronation just months earlier, and for the first time since the war, ordinary working people are thinking about something their parents could scarcely imagine: owning their own motor car. The nation was changing rapidly. The average weekly wage for a man over 21 had climbed to about £8, and people were beginning to believe that prosperity might actually be within reach. The bomb damage was being cleared from city centres. New housing estates were springing up in the suburbs, and with them came a hunger for mobility, for independence, for the freedom that only a motor car could provide. But here's the thing. While Morris was charging £561 for a four-door Minor, and Austin wanted £504 for their A30, a small Coventry firm called Standard was about to do something audacious. They were going to build a proper four-door family saloon with a modern overhead valve engine and sell it for £481. Not £480 and 19 shillings. £481, full stop. The car was called the Standard 8, and it undercut every single competitor in its class. It embarrassed the Austin A30 by £23 and made the Morris Minor look positively expensive at £80 more. For families who'd spent the past 8 years eating off ration books and dreaming of better days, this wasn't just a cheap car. It was a ticket to freedom, wrapped in pressed steel and painted in sensible British racing green or midnight blue. But there's more to this story than simple economics. The Standard 8 and its more powerful sibling, the 10, represent something remarkable in British motoring history. A brief moment when a relatively small manufacturer got almost everything right. They built cars that were cheaper than their rivals, more advanced in engineering, and surprisingly competitive in motorsport. And yet, if you ask most enthusiasts today about 1950s economy cars, they'll mention the Morris Minor or the Austin A30, the Standard 8 and 10. Somehow, they've become the forgotten heroes of Britain's post-war recovery. This is their story, and trust me, it deserves to be told. Section 1. Born from desperation, the Coventry gamble. To understand the Standard 8, you need to understand the Standard Motor Company's position in the early 50s. This wasn't a company flush with success. This was a firm fighting for survival, led by Sir John Black. Black had joined Standard in 1929, when the company was producing just 34 cars a week. Through the 30s, he'd turned it around spectacularly. By 1939, Standard was producing over 50,000 cars annually. He'd achieved this through ruthless efficiency and mass production techniques. The war years saw Standard's factories producing over 1,100 Mosquito aircraft. Black had also snapped up the bankrupt Triumph Motor Company in 1945 for £75,000. But it was the agreement to manufacture Harry Ferguson's tractor at Banner Lane that would fund the 8's development, generating roughly 70% of company profits by the early 50s. What Standard desperately needed was a car to compete in the booming small car sector, where Morris and Austin were making fortunes. The competition was formidable. The Morris Minor had captured public imagination since 1948. The Austin A30, introduced in 1951, offered Britain's first truly chassis-less construction in a small car. In late 1950, Black authorized development of an entirely new small car. The brief was brutally simple: create a modern four-door saloon that could be sold profitably for less than £500. Standard would use unit construction, develop a new overhead valve engine using existing Triumph Mayflower tooling, and source body panels from Fisher and Ludlow. What nobody knew was that Fisher and Ludlow would be taken over by BMC in September 1953, just as the Standard 8 launched. There was genuine fear that BMC's chairman would strangle a competitor, but the contract was honored for the car's entire production life. Section 2. The engineering. Simple, clever, and properly done. Let's talk about what made the Standard 8 and 10 genuinely good motorcars, because despite their humble price, these weren't cynical exercises in cost-cutting. They were properly engineered vehicles that in several respects outclassed their more expensive rivals. The heart of the car was the new Standard SC engine. When the 8 launched in September 1953, it displaced 803 cubic centimeters, exactly the same as the Austin A-Series engine that powered the A30 and the Morris Minor Series 2. This led to persistent rumors that Standard had simply copied Austin's design. Not true. While both engines shared the same bore and stroke, 63 mm by 76 mm, they were fundamentally different designs. The SC engine had its camshaft and push rods on the right-hand side when viewed from the front, with inlet and exhaust ports on the left. The Austin A-Series had exactly the opposite arrangement. More significantly, the Standard engine had separate exhaust ports for each cylinder from day one, while Austin Siamesed the ports for the 2 inner cylinders, a cost-saving measure that affected breathing efficiency. In the 8, this 803 cubic centimeter engine produced 26 brake horsepower at 4,500 revolutions per minute. Not impressive on paper, but the car was remarkably light, just 1,500 weight, ready for the road. When the Motor magazine tested a Standard 8 in 1953, they recorded a top speed of 61 miles per hour and achieved 43 miles per imperial gallon. The acceleration from 0 to 50 miles per hour took 26.5 seconds. Sedate, certainly, but adequate for the era. The transmission was a proper 4-speed gearbox with synchromesh on the top 3 ratios, a significant advantage over Ford's stubborn commitment to 3-speed offerings. The gear ratios were well chosen for British driving conditions. Steering required just 2¼ turns lock to lock, and the Girling hydraulic drum brakes were progressive and effective for the era. But here's where it gets interesting. In March 1954, just 6 months after the 8's launch, Standard introduced the 10. This used a bored-out version of the SC engine, now displacing 948 cubic centimeters, making Standard the first British manufacturer to offer a sub-1-litre engine of this specific size. The extra displacement brought power up to 33 brake horsepower at 4,500 revolutions per minute. When the Motor tested a Standard 10 in 1954, they recorded a top speed of 69 miles per hour and a 0 to 60 time of 38.3 seconds. Suddenly, you had a car that could genuinely keep up with traffic, carry 4 adults in reasonable comfort, and still return impressive fuel economy. The body engineering was equally thoughtful. The Standard 8 and 10 used unit construction, no separate chassis frame, with a remarkably stiff body shell. The suspension used independent front suspension with coil springs and wishbones, and a solid rear axle with semi-elliptic leaf springs. Nothing exotic, but the geometry was well sorted, and the cars quickly developed a reputation for surprisingly good handling. Section 3. The austerity specification and how it improved. The Standard 8, in its original specification, reveals just how brutal the cost-cutting had to be to hit that £481 price point. The basic Standard 8 of September 1953 was genuinely Spartan. It had sliding windows, not wind-up windows, a single windscreen wiper, the passenger side wiper was optional. Even hubcaps were extras. Rear windows didn't open at all. And here's the kicker, there was no external boot lid. If you wanted to access the boot, you folded down the split rear seat back. Think about that. Standard was asking families to pay £481 for a car where you couldn't open the boot from outside. But remember the context. This was a Britain where bread had been rationed until 1948, where meat was still rationed until 1954. A car, any car, represented freedom beyond measure. Despite these austerities, customers lined up. Standard had set an ambitious target of 50,000 cars per year, and sales immediately suggested they'd exceed it. But improvements came quickly as consumer expectations rose. By mid-1955, all Standard 8s got wind-up windows as standard. The 1957 Gold Star model finally introduced an opening boot lid. Interior trim improved gradually, with better quality vinide upholstery. The Standard 10, introduced in March 1954 at £510 and 10 shillings, addressed many equipment deficits from the start. It had wind-up windows on all 4 doors, passenger side wiper and sun visor as standard, and even hubcaps. For families who could stretch the extra £30, the 10 represented significantly better value. From March 1957, Standard offered optional overdrive on both models, making them among the first small British cars with this feature. They also offered a semi-automatic stand-drive transmission, though it was temperamental and rarely specified. Section 4. The motorsport success nobody expected. Let me tell you about one of the most improbable victories in British rallying history. 1955, the RAC Rally. A factory-prepared Standard 10, driven by Jimmy Ray and Brian Horrocks, won outright. A car that cost £510, 948 cubic centimetres and 33 brake horsepower, a car that took 38 seconds to reach 60. That car won one of Britain's premier rallying events. The rally used a handicapping system that favoured small cars, and big, powerful machines carried significant time penalties. But even accounting for the handicap, the Standard 10's victory was remarkable. It spoke to the fundamental rightness of the car's engineering: the stiff monocoque bodyshell, the well-sorted suspension, the robust drivetrain. Works rally cars received twin carburetors, a front anti-roll bar, a sump guard, modified rear springs for the extra capacity, fuel tank, additional instrumentation, a map reading light, 2-speed wipers, an additional electric fuel pump, and finned brake covers. Most of these features were available to private buyers through the accessories catalogue. Motorsport magazine, reviewing a Standard 10 in June 1955, declared it Britain's outstanding small car, praising its overhead valve engine and 4-speed gearbox compared to Ford's side valves and 3 speeds. The competition's success should have been a marketing bonanza, but Standard never really capitalized on it. There was no homologation special, no rally model with works upgrades off the showroom floor. Perhaps they couldn't afford the tooling investment, or believed their core customers wouldn't pay extra for sporting pretensions. Either way, it was a missed opportunity. Section 5. The production numbers. Success by any measure. From 1953 to 1959, Standard produced approximately 370,000 passenger versions of the SC family. That's a remarkable achievement, comfortably exceeding the 50,000 per year target. The breakdown. The Standard 8 accounted for 136,000 units. The Standard 10 sold 172,500 units. The upmarket pennant variant, introduced in 1957 with tail fins and two-tone paint, sold 43,000 units, and 18,000 were sold in America, badged as the Triumph TR10. Put those numbers in perspective. Standard's entire SC family outsold the Austin A30 and A35 combined, which totaled approximately 350,000 units over a similar period. The Morris Minor sold over 1 million units, but it had been in production since 1948 and continued until 1971, 23 years, compared to the Standard's 6 years. Standard also built the companion estate car from June 1955, one of the first small British estate cars with rear passenger doors, unlike rivals such as the Ford Squire and Hillman Husky. The companion continued until 1961. For a company that in 1929 had been producing 34 cars a week, these were extraordinary numbers. Standard had become a major player in the British small car market. Section 6. The global reach. Different badges, same car. The standard 8 and 10 went global, wearing different badges in different markets, revealing the complicated relationship between the Standard and Triumph brands. In the United States, the car was badged as the Triumph TR10. This made marketing sense. American dealers knew Triumph through the TR sports cars, and Standard sounded generic. The 18,000 American buyers got left-hand drive, 10 models, often with two-tone paint. In Scandinavia, it became the Standard Vanguard Junior. In Australia, the Standard Cadet, built locally. Standard's Indian factory continued building the Pennant until 1961 as the Standard 10. This proliferation of badges reveals the fundamental tension at Standard Triumph. The Standard name carried associations with value and reliability, but was increasingly seen as down-market. The Triumph name carried sporting glamour from the TR sports cars. Neither had the classless appeal of Morris or the engineering prestige of Austin. By the late 50s, management had decided the future lay with Triumph. When the replacement for the 8, 10, and Pennant was developed, it was badged as a Triumph from the start, despite carrying over many mechanical components from the small Standards. Section 7. The replacement arrives. In April 1959, the Triumph Herald was unveiled. Styled by Italian designer Giovanni Michelotti, it featured separate chassis construction, independent rear suspension, and distinctively modern appearance. Under the skin, it was largely Standard 8 and 10 mechanicals dressed in Italian fashion. The Herald used an enlarged SC engine, initially 1,047 cubic centimeters, later 1,147, and shared the Standard's gearbox, differential, and many other components. But it cost more than the old Standard 10 and appealed to a slightly different buyer, younger, more style-conscious, less concerned with pure value per pound. Production of the Standard 8 and 10 saloons ended in November 1959. The companion estate continued until 1961, the light commercials until 1964. The final Standard badged for the UK market was a Vanguard, produced in May 1963. The name lived on in India until 1988, but in Britain it was over. Section 8. The Forgotten Legacy. Here's what puzzles me about the Standard 8 and 10. By almost any objective measure, they were successful cars. 370,000 sold in 6 years. Competitively priced, well-engineered, and in the 10's case, genuinely pleasant to drive. They even won the RAC Rally. The SC engine went on to power Triumphs for decades. Yet talk to most classic car enthusiasts about 50s economy cars, and they'll mention the Morris Minor's charm or the Austin A30's technical innovation. The Standard 8 and 10? Blank looks. Part of the problem is the name. Standard 8 sounds generic, almost apologetic. It doesn't sing like Minor or carry heritage like Austin 7. The cars themselves in base 8 specification looked rather austere, that gaping grille, those sliding windows, the absent boot lid. They weren't pretty like a Minor, and they weren't technically interesting like the A30's monocoque. But there's something else. The Morris Minor became an icon, partly because it lasted 1948 to 1971, and because Alec Isigonis became a celebrity. The Standard 8 and 10 lasted just 6 years before the Herald. Their designer? In-house styling, no celebrity name. The Standard Motor Company was absorbed into Leyland in 1961 and eventually disappeared into British Leyland. The brand had no champion, no heritage centre, no enthusiast base preserving its memory. Standard became a footnote in Triumph's story, which itself became a footnote in British Leyland's collapse. Section 9. The cars today. If you're interested in finding a Standard 8 or 10 today, values remain remarkably low. A Morris Minor in decent condition runs from £5,000 to £20,000. An Austin A30 or A35 might be £3,000 to £15,000. A Standard 8 or 10? You can find decent examples for £1,000 to £6,000. They're simply not fashionable, which means extraordinary value for anyone who wants to drive a genuine 50s economy car without paying inflated heritage prices. The challenge is parts availability. The standard 8 and 10 never developed the enthusiast following that ensures reproduction panels and components. Many Herald and Spitfire components interchange, but body panels and specific trim items can be difficult to source. Rust is the enemy, as with all unit construction cars of this era. Sills, floor pans, and rear wheel arches are particularly vulnerable. But a solid example can be restored, and mechanical components are straightforward to maintain. The other challenge is recognition. Take a standard 10 to a classic car show, and you'll spend time explaining what it is. For some owners, this becomes tiresome. For others, it's part of the charm, owning something genuinely obscure that most people have forgotten. What are we to make of the standard 8 and 10? They represent a brief moment when a relatively small manufacturer got almost everything right. They created cars that were affordable without being cheap, modern without being pretentious, and capable without being expensive to run. They did it when Britain was finally emerging from post-war austerity, when families were beginning to dream of holidays and leisure and personal mobility. The standard 8 and 10 made those dreams accessible to people who might otherwise have been priced out of motoring. £481 in 1953. That was £80 less than a Morris Minor, and for many families, that made all the difference. The fact that these cars have been largely forgotten doesn't diminish their achievement. 370,000 families chose Standard over Morris, or Austin, or Ford. They made memories in these cars: holidays to the seaside, Sunday drives through the countryside, the daily commute that meant freedom from the bus timetable. Some won rallies. Others simply soldiered on through decades of family service. The Standard name is gone now, absorbed into British Leyland's complicated genealogy and ultimately owned by BMW as an unused trademark. But the cars remain, if you know where to look. Quieter than Minors, less fashionable than Austins, but honest, capable, and deserving of recognition. If you owned a Standard 8 or 10, or if your parents or grandparents did, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. What was it like? How did it compare to its rivals? Did it rust, or did it surprise you with its durability? And if you enjoyed this dive into a forgotten corner of British motoring history, please hit that subscribe button. There are plenty more stories about the cars everyone else has forgotten. Thanks for watching. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got an overwhelming urge to go find a Standard 10. There's one advertised for £3,000 in Nottinghamshire, and at that price, it's tempting. Very tempting indeed.